My name is Dan Robitzski. I'm the senior reporter at Futurism, which is a news outlet that covers the science and tech that will kind of shape tomorrow. Very forward-looking technology, very forward-looking scientific research and the ways they intersect with art and culture and the law and kind of any other thing that's interesting to us. It's not very formal. There is a very good reason that I write for a living instead of speaking. So I'm going to be very upfront about the fact that I'm really hoping I don't talk for a whole hour. If I'm rambling or if I have thoughts or questions, or if you have thoughts or questions rather on what I'm saying, please shout them out. Especially if you disagree or you want to call me out, like, please, that would be fantastic. I'd much rather have this be a conversation about science and tech and what's coming and all those other fascinating things, or a chance to kind of join in on what you normally do. But that said, I did have some stuff that I came in ready to talk about. If that's a helpful way to start. I thought it would be useful to kind of explain kind of how I got from being in a similar position to you three. I vaguely assume to where I am now, because that would help, I think, clarify what I do and how I do it. So when I was in undergrad, I went to Lafayette up in Pennsylvania. I studied neuroscience. I was gung-ho on the pre-med track. Um, I really wanted to know, and this kind of through all of my classes, what drove me is I was fascinated by learning how a pile of bioelectric signals, the kind of synapses and signals firing around in our brains, turned us into thinking and feeling and conscious people with thoughts and dreams, goals, memories, all those things. It's always blown me away, but I kind of quickly realized that my heart wasn't in medicine. It wasn't in going into that. To be transparent, my experience in actual academic research is extremely limited. I think my name's on like an abstract or a paper here and there. I don't even know how many, which should tell how often I deal with that side of things. But the real turning point for me was actually one of my classes. My senior capstone was all about issues within science. Not issues that science is solving, but kind of problems with how science is done, or not even problems, but unresolved questions. Like we talked a lot about, there was this raging debate over adult human neurogenesis, which is whether or not our brain can make new cells or brain cells after we're born, or if all that happens during prenatal development. And there's a lot of really cool research on it, but there was this whole thing where prominent scientists who firmly believed one way or another were like airing out their grievances and like basically having a feud within their papers, and helping get people who agreed with them published over others. And like the fact that that argument and that kind of pettiness happens among like prestigious neuroscientists in prestigious journals was fascinating to me. And issues within, for instance, how clinical research was done. There was this FDA whistleblower whose name eludes me right now, which is embarrassing, but it's fine. Who was on the review team that looked at the research for SSRI antidepressants, and he basically revealed that there were a whole bunch of studies that showed that these things don't work as well as a lot of people assume they did, but the academic journals and the FDA were looking only at papers that had positive results, meaning they found an effect of these medications rather than the studies that said, maybe not. And the fact that there were papers and valuable research just being overlooked was fascinating to me. But really, what stood out is that I learned about these problems after 3.5 years of a college education on science, after years and years of learning about molecular pathways and how the science works without realizing that like the science itself wasn't like a bastion of truth, because there can be problems with journals. And uh, it was troubling to me that there were these communication gaps that I needed to spend 4 years studying to even learn that these problems could exist. And I realized that I wanted to talk about science and these things within science and research a lot more than I wanted to do it. Staring down a career standing behind a lab bench and slicing brains for 8 hours a day versus like talking about these very cool things. It was a very clear choice for me. Um, so at the idea, I had no idea what it meant to be a science communicator. I was like, I want to tell everyone about this. I'm going to ring the alarm bells. I'm going to, I'm going to write an essay, and I don't know what that means, but I'm going to do it. So I went to journalism school. I had no idea what journalism was. One of the first big stories I pursued was that SSRI article about that whistleblower, and it was very cool. The broader issues of negative results being unpublished and what that means for science, and the researchers and the journals that are trying to fix the problem. So I was like, great, I'm done. Um, but yeah, so I'm rambling. Please interrupt whenever. But at the time, I thought my job would be to translate important developments and issues within science, kind of for lay people, for the people who didn't spend years and years learning about it, right? Because these things are important. You shouldn't have to go to college for 4 years to study this specific thing to even learn that it's going on. And I wanted to be kind of that megaphone for these issues, right? And at the time, I thought that meant like translating technical science into accessible language, and that's part of it. But to translate implies being merely a stenographer, saying like, "Here's what they're saying. Now it's digestible." That's part of it, but also a big part of what I do is crafting a story to make sure that instead of saying, "Here's a paper that says X," I'm uh, telling my audience, whoever that may be, something useful, something interesting, something that not only makes them walk away a little bit better informed and better equipped to navigate the world, but also they're, enjoying it. They're engaged in science and research and technology and these things that are really shaping our society in a seriously influential way. To walk away appreciating it and caring about it a little bit more. It's strange to think about that everything I do as a reporter, as a journalist, as a writer is in service, and it feels goofy saying it, but in service of the reader rather than my sources or my editor or my boss. I'd rather have a scientist who I interview a little unhappy with the way I portray them than not tell a complete story to the people I'm actually writing for. And that's kind of how I approach a lot of my work. One of the things that drives me the most as I'm kind of tackling all these issues within science and tech, and even just new developments, it doesn't always have to be like a huge controversial story, is that I want to make science and the ways of thinking or approaching the world that comes with kind of a scientific mindset more accessible, not dumbed down by any means, but accessible, because I think you don't need to dumb things down if you can just explain them well, and a lot less stuffy. So how do I do that? A huge part of it is just asking questions, which again, maybe obvious to say out loud, but it's just part of the skill set of what I do. You find kind of the best stories within science, the biggest gaps in what is conveyed through new research and new tech by just kind of saying, oh, what questions am I left with after I've read this, and who can I ask to find out about it? When you read an article, when you listen to a talk, when you read a scientific paper, just thinking about what's missing. Think about whether the claims that a scientist makes in the abstract and discussion of a paper, where they really get to wax philosophically about what their work means, is justified by what they've done in the methods and what they've actually found in the results. What didn't they test is a lot of how I approach things. When a big tech corporation deploys a new tool, what aren't they saying about how it can or might be used? Things like that are what lead to kind of scoops or interesting stories. Thoughts like these, to really scrutinize these sources, whether they're papers, scientists, companies, developers, engineers, etc., can lead to me uncovering or even crafting new and important, I like to think sometimes, articles and stories. And that doesn't mean I'm trying to debunk every paper. It's almost never that extreme. And again, who am I to do that. But asking questions about kind of filling out the story that this paper is telling can be extremely valuable. And that's one of the most important services that I can do as someone who's not doing the science, but helps bring it to more people. Really getting the whole idea out of it. Um, and also, I think one of the most important things as a reporter in the science and tech space, which is one of the things that I didn't even realize when I started, because I just wanted to talk about cool research. I wasn't even thinking about this function, but to kind of serve as a watchdog is very important to say what I do. And I'm laughing because it just feels strange to say all this out loud, very self-important in a way that I don't much care for, but I'm going to power through. But yeah, so much of what I do is getting excited about new developments and progress in neuroscience, in AI, in medicine, in gene editing is something I've been doing a lot of work on lately, while still kind of interrogating the people behind them. Not again in any sort of gotcha way, but to say, hey, this paper isn't perfect. I want to be able to poke at that flaw, kind of pull at the thread and maybe criticize that flaw or hazards of a new technology without falling into a sort of an easy cynicism that doesn't really benefit anyone. It's kind of easy to be a curmudgeon about new AI and some of the ways it might be used, but that overlooks a lot of the very cool things that people are doing and a lot of the ways that scientists are being extremely thoughtful about ethical issues in tech and trying to solve them. A lot of people will agree that ethical issues exist, but finding and spotlighting and engaging with the people who are working to fix them and then telling that story is, I think, immensely valuable. And that's something I like to look out for. And some of these issues, it's tough because you have to, if you talk about 3D printing, there's a lot of very cool stuff that can be done. Scientists plan to 3D print human organs in space, where the absence of gravity will prevent their extremely delicate vasculature from collapsing under its own weight. So they're just taking it into orbit. There's a 3D printer on the International Space Station, and this is what they're working on. I mean, that's the coolest sci-fi thing I've ever heard of, right? I mean, organs, hopefully viable someday, for a donation that are manufactured in space because that's a thing that we can do. That's a sentence that we can say out loud. Blows my mind every time I think about it. But at home, we can 3D print working firearms. And you need to grapple with both of those. We're about to see an era shaped by gene therapies that use CRISPR and other techniques to target and treat previously uncurable genetic diseases that really, they limit people's lifespan in a serious way. They limit people's quality of life in a serious way. And we're learning to reverse mutations, which is previously unthinkable. And now it's something that so many teams are working on, and it's very close to reality and clinical use. But those same gene hacking tools could potentially develop a weapon, right? There's always a dual-edged sword. Facial recognition, AI is all over now. Does it improve public safety? Does it eradicate privacy and put marginalized groups at greater risk than ever before? AI itself can be a powerful tool of creation. It can help create new art. It can help, all these different applications, but it can also help bad actors spread disinformation across the internet, across social media. Geoengineering could help suck greenhouse gases out of the environment, or it could delay real climate action and further worsen global inequality with where it's used and how it's used. It's, the geopolitical landscape of trying to reverse climate change. These are the sort of questions that I have to grapple with in my work, where I say, wow, look at this new tool. Where can things go wrong? How can it be misused? Who stands to benefit? Who might be harmed by this? And I raise these issues not to say 3D printing or CRISPR or carbon capture is inherently dangerous or that they were mistakes by any means. Far from it, because of all the very cool things that we can do with them. But as you enter the worlds of science and tech or business or wherever else this fascination is taking all of you, You'll see a shocking number of people who are developing new technologies or new uses for technology because they can, without giving much thought as to whether or not they should, or how that might be used, what will happen to it now that it's out of their hands. A lot of engineers who I talk to about new AI, the amount of white papers I've read where there's a single sentence in the discussion about, oh, this might be misused and someone else will figure out the best way to do it. Um, it's frustrating and it's challenging, and that's part of where I and other reporters come in, because it's kind of our job to say, well, hold on, wait a minute. It sounded like you glossed over that a little bit. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about where this could go. And again, not to be a cynic, but to raise the difficult questions and have the difficult conversations so that people who kind of only get the idealized view of, facial recognition makes us safe might not otherwise hear about, over policing with facial recognition or things like that. To kind of bring those issues to the forefront is a lot of what I do. Um, I mean, there are so many facial recognition algorithms. This is the easiest one to kind of rip on. Um, if there's an algorithm that helps a self-driving car maybe detect a pedestrian, awesome, great, love it, build it right away, put it in every self-driving car, right? But then there are so many facial recognition algorithms that claim to measure higher ability or intelligence, basically reinventing phrenology, which is the pseudoscience from 18th, 19th century, I'm not sure when, that like based on the shape of your face, you can tell a lot about a person's intelligence and personality and all of them. And it's nonsense, but we keep rebuilding it with AI for no good reason. Um, and a lot of the work that I do is to say, well, we've heard of this. It didn't work in history. It's not going to work now. And it's also maybe a little bit dangerous in the way that it exposes people to algorithmic bias and all these other things. And it's difficult because, these are annoying questions. I don't want to be a stick in the mud with my work by any means, but these are issues that need talking about, because we want to make sure, and I say we generally, I hope we all do, we want to make sure that the tools and systems that surround us are in place to our benefit rather than to our detriment. Um, and a lot of kind of reporting and talking to scientists, especially the ones who didn't work on a new paper, someone else who works in that field and doesn't have a stake in whether or not this paper gets published or kind of takes off, to say, hey, can you kick the tires? Can you give me a gut check on this? Does this seem reasonable? Are the discoveries that this scientist says they've made backed up by what they did? I think is a huge part of bringing context and a full story to science in a way that people can understand. Um, and to the idea of the ways that things can go wrong, one of the core questions that shapes my work, especially as we look into the future and the things that might guide the future, are, are the right people shaping the future? Or rather, are the people that we're letting shape the future and kind of take the reins the right ones for the job? Um, in the sense of giant tech platforms, some of the most powerful people in the world today, the wealthiest people today, are in the tech space, right? I mean, Bill Gates was the richest, Jeff Bezos is the richest, Elon Musk kind of fluttered up and down between one and two for a while, and that's, Microsoft, Amazon, SpaceX, Tesla, and all that. It's all the tech sector that wields so much power right now. Um, doing my job to, and I say this trying to sound the least bit self-important, to try and kind of keep things in line and engage a productive conversation that doesn't necessarily reflect those interests and that the framing that company might put out about their new tools, right? Um, and then finding the people who are actually coming up with solutions. Who are they? Where are they? Are their ideas feasible? If not, what could a solution look like? Again, just because there are big issues in the world doesn't mean cynicism is beneficial, especially for me, someone who somehow has an audience. How do I stay productive about all this? How do I highlight the good that's being done in a reasonable and productive way? Um, there are so many people who are trying to improve the planet, or the time that we get to spend on it through their research, their tinkering, through their clinics, their medical research, and it's my job to either get the conversations about that started, to kind of find them and bring them into the forefront as best I can, or to keep that conversation moving along. Like climate change. A lot of people have said, okay, we need to transition to renewables. We need to find ways to build carbon capture that sucks CO2 out of the atmosphere and kind of sequesters it somewhere. We need to find ways to make that feasible. Okay, who's actually doing that, instead of just saying again and again that it should happen and it would be nice if it did, right? Um, and of course, there's the overarching fact that I am one person with my own opinions and perspectives on all these things, with who just so happens to have a disproportionately large platform. I mean, you invited me on here. I have people who read my articles all the time, which is still baffling to me. But it's me with my perspective, and the Futurism editorial team perspectives that's being put out there. But it's not my job to say what the conversation is. It's kind of to find that conversation and progress it. And so a huge part of what allows me to do that, which again, the irony of talking about it for so long, is just the humility of it, the willingness and even eagerness to, when I'm talking to an expert who does and will always understand more about a scientific topic than I do, to accept that there's a lot that I don't know, and that there's a lot that I need to learn, to kind of challenge myself to not know what the story that I'm going to tell is before I even write it. I can tackle an issue or a development in science without knowing where I'm going to fall, or where the facts are going to fall, or where my reporting is going to fall, and kind of the willingness to tell the story as it is rather than what I thought it should be before learning about it. And again, that comes back to my job to make my audience, which varies from publication to publication, understand what's going on and what I'm talking about, and be able to engage with that issue in a productive way, not to prove anything or to show that I get it. Um, when I'm interviewing a scientist, the amount of times I'll have them explain something that to them is elementary, because I don't need to come at it like I'm taking a science test. Like, oh, of course I understand CRISPR. If I can have them explain it in a way that they would explain it to, their niece or their nephew, I can kind of take that strategy and again make it understandable and digestible to people who again aren't pouring through the papers themselves, and just make all of these issues so much more public facing, so much more accessible, without everyone kind of needing to just like politely nod and say, "Oh yeah, I understand that." I think like actually making it digestible is a huge important of that. Yeah, so to that end, I've spoken quickly and a whole lot, and perhaps for too long. I can keep rambling about all this for forever, but I'm also really interested and learning more about what brought all of you into this room, or this Zoom rather. Are tired Zoom jokes way too old yet? I don't know. But I'm so interested in learning what brought all of you here into this group, into a group of people who wants to again discuss science and tech ethics, and your think tank discussions that I see you have, and where you hope they're going. I want to, I would love to open this up. I would love to learn more about kind of the topics and questions that spark interest in all of you. The challenges that drive you to join here and learn about this and talk about all this. What do you think the most important challenges are? Things like that. I'd love to open this up. I'm happy to keep going, but I feel like it would probably be a lot more interesting if we were all kind of sharing there. I realize I'm being vague, but I'd love to know kind of why you all decided, I want to talk about the things that are going to shape the future. I'd love to learn what first got you thinking about this. If anyone wants to share or jump in, or in any way that's very much not a quiz. I'm just so curious about having a conversation.
Yeah, sure. I can start it. So for me, it kind of started in end of ninth grade. I
Mm.
was kind of exposed to like neuroscience.
Yeah.
There's a specific show called The Brain with David Eagleman. It was like a PBS special. And that was just extremely interesting to me. It was like something I'd never seen before. Um, and like brain science in particular is such like a new and like rapidly evolving field. I was like, oh, this
Mhm.
is so interesting. And then when I went to high school, I decided to start like a basically like a neuroscience club. Um, and that kind of started to evolve into like more like not even just neuroscience, but just the future in general.
Mhm.
Because, once you get into the brain, then you're thinking about like AI, and then you're thinking about like robotics, and then you're thinking about
Right.
like the environment, and it just like evolves into this like more broad field, where like kind of everything is like interconnected in a way. Um, and so when I came to Hopkins, I really wanted to continue that, but I wanted it to have a more broad focus, because um, it had really been just more like a neuroscience club. So I decided to like just start like a brand new club, based, like I said, based off of your work and Futurism. I had met Ben Badii,
Uh-huh.
and he really inspired me to like keep pursuing it, like stay super curious, always reading your articles and everything. And so I started Futurism, and Ricardo joined, John joined, other people joined, and it's just been this way for me to like keep connected with what people are thinking about the future, like having these conversations, because these are conversations that are hardly had. I think that's a big issue because these are the technologies and the people and the developments that are going to shape the future. And it really worries me that no one really talks about it, especially like the ethics side of it. Because, like you were saying, like just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And I think before we, you know, develop AI and, develop all these technologies, we have to think about, is this really where we want to go? Like,
Mhm.
is this where we want to spend our effort? Like, what are the repercussions? Um, and so that's really what inspires me, just like having the conversation. I think that's like the first thing, like just the awareness of it.
Mhm.
Because if you're not aware of the problem, you're not aware of the solutions,
Right.
and you can't really do anything about it. So for me, some people are more about like, just going straight into it, like developing technology, like this is so cool. And I love that. But I
Mhm.
think it's also important to just be educated about it and just having conversations. So that's kind of where I come from and why I enjoy doing this. So I'll open it to.
No, that's awesome.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, and it was kind of similar for me too, in the sense that, like I said, who knows how long ago now, I came into writing about science because I was fascinated by the brain and consciousness and all these things and these issues within neuroscience research. And I kind of fell backwards into tech coverage and AI, especially because you run into so many people who say, oh, the solution to artificial general intelligence, which is uh, the sort of the AI you see in sci-fi movies, right, where it can think and feel and be creative, and it's like a all-encompassing intelligence rather than the very limited AI that we have today. The people trying to build that were like, oh well, if we can just build the human brain from scratch, it'll be easy, right? No problem. And the the near impossibility of that kind of stood out to me so much as just such an impossible engineering challenge. I mean, there are incredible technologies inspired after nature, but it's you wouldn't expect it to be such a hard and fast rule that nature kind of did it first and better. And it's so interesting that like these brain-based approaches are so pervasive despite their challenges when maybe an entirely new paradigm is what gets us there to new AI. Um, Rambling again, I'd love to hear John Ricardo if you want to share. You don't have to, of course, by any means, but um, if either of you feel like it. Otherwise, I'll be happy to keep going.
I mean, yeah, I can hear a lot of what you're saying and what Nick has already said, just echoing as part of like kind of my history with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I definitely always just wanted to be on the cutting edge of things because I feel
Yeah.
like stagnation and just kind of sitting in the niche that you have is not super productive. And for me, it wouldn't be satisfying just to kind of stagnate like that. But I'm an environmental engineering major.
Oh, very cool.
So as opposed to like Nick, who's into neuroscience and stuff like that, I want to be involved in the cutting edge of trying to solve like the big existential threats that we have concerning the environment and the earth and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And slowly over time I realized that a lot of this stuff that futurism kind of revolves around is very interconnected. So I mean you have like environmental engineering and then you kind of can extend that into like biomimicry and then that can go into like robotics and just a whole plethora of different like
Mm-hmm.
subjects and they all kind of interconnect. And I find it really fascinating that when you get into these futuristic like futurism discussions that we can kind of like relate different ideas to different subjects and stuff like that. So that's why I decided to really stick around and kind of engage in these discussions because I think it's really important to keep growing in that way.
Yeah. No, and that's awesome. I feel like, a lot of and maybe I'm projecting a little bit, but I feel like a lot of what you're going to run into is kind of this techno utopian perspective, right? Too, where it's we have this existential crisis. It's the biggest one we're facing, climate change right now, right? Which is so weird to have to say after the year we've had. And like I was talking about, please figure out carbon capture. That would be so cool of you to do. If you can do that. There's so many challenges where technology is going to get us part of the way, but also lifestyle changes are going to get us part of the way. Dietary changes are going to get us part of the way. And I think it's such a cool field to be entering, kind of knowing that the actual technological work of it is only going to be part of the solution, most likely. And I'm not arriving at a point here, but it's such an interesting issue that you're going to be tackling soon. So that's very cool. And it's great that you're thinking about this too and these issues instead of just saying like, all right, well, what can I work on and call it a job well done. To be able to think about the broader problem and the broader challenge is going to be so valuable. So that's very cool. Again, I'm not arriving at a point, so. um, yeah. So, oh, Ricardo, I saw you unmuted earlier. Again, I would love to give everyone space to talk and share and weigh in on this. I don't want to speak over you by any means. Again, I don't want to put you on the spot either, but I'm deeply curious.
Yeah, so my beginnings with futurism and technology in general started off with me being a little kid, just because at the start I just wanted to be an astronaut, just because I thought it was so cool, the idea of going to space and seeing
Oh yeah.
stars and planets, right? And so I started going on that journey, just slowly learning various things. I changed in middle school what I wanted to do, and instead of going to space, because back then in middle school, I realized that it's really scary just being in the void of space. Was focusing on technology because I also loved video games and what you can do, the fact that you can have these amazingly created worlds with stories, with so much interaction just into a data inside of a console that you're able to interact with. It was so cool to me. So I was like, I'm going to get into technology through software. I'm going to do video games. And that's when I started off. I started reading in school various books. I've heard about Jules Verne, which is a super like well-known science fiction writer. I started reading his stories, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, like all these different stories. And they just inspire me to keep going and like really pursuing science. And computer science, especially just because, what if you were able to create the book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but like make it interactive, make it so that you're able to experience,
Mhm.
right, what the book is trying to get you to experience. And I just thought it was so cool. And
Mhm.
so I went on this journey, and I've had different conversations with people, but I've never really had this space where I could have these like deep, really conversation about space travel could be, future of technology, the gadgets that we use every day, possibly medical innovations that are happening. So just finding this club really inspired me to just be here and really talk about this, because who knows, maybe one of us will figure out something amazing or be part of this amazing future that we want to have. And I feel like, especially for me, computer science is able to do a big part of that, especially today, since we're surrounded by all these gadgets, all these different technology that we use every day. And without computer science, we wouldn't have any of this. So I feel like if I'm able to partake in this, I would be able to have a big part of it, in one way or another. So that's essentially what brought me here and why I'm doing computer science.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a much more uplifting story than the existential crisis in middle school made it seem like it was going to be. No, that's awesome too. And yeah, I mean, the idea of I mean, I don't know if you're specifically interested in like VR when you're talking about that, like immersive 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or anything like that. It's so fascinating the ways that people are building, you know, virtual worlds almost. I mean, one of this is a few years ago now, but one of my favorite stories that I did, one of my more like long form investigative ones, not for Futurism, unfortunately, but for a different publication. It was about how I was at this VR conference, VR and media, people making music videos, making movies, making journalism, all in VR. Someone made the remark that right now we're in the era um, where it's like we've figured out how to record video on film, but no one has figured out or no one has come up with the idea of a movie theater yet, right? We have this technology, we have this emerging medium and way to interact with each other in the world in the past, and to be transported and experience uh, places and things that we otherwise never would, and we just don't really know how to best use it yet. And sorry, you talking about like these new immersive experiences and ways to interact with classics and other maybe even space travel, like an experience in space or something, reminds me of just like these unanswered questions that desperately need discussion and answers. It's such again another very cool space to be in. And again, yeah, we're living in a world of software right now. I mean, when's the last time we saw people in person, right? When's the last time we socialized in person instead of doing something like this, like playing Jackbox games or something? Um, and it raises, I think, oh, this was, the author's name is eluding me, but there was this great essay, I think in BuzzFeed, that's basically like, okay, this is the world right now that technology was building towards. You know, we have a computer in our pocket, we're staring at screens all the time, everything is virtual, everything is convenient, and it's pretty unfulfilling. I would love to be in a crowded room again. I would love to look someone in the eye and have a conversation with them. You know, I would love to have to walk somewhere. And it's like, if this was kind of where all this technology was heading, how do we shape it in a way that's rewarding and beneficial and enjoyable? It's something I don't have the answer to, but it's so interesting thinking about like where these technologies, you know, everything around me is immersive, but is it what we wanted? That's a serious question that needs answering, and I think it's very cool to be able to have that conversation. Um, Awesome. So again, I'm rambling, which is great. I'll do it forever. But I also wanted to know if any of you had any questions. If there was anything that I said earlier that sparked something you wanted to talk more about, I'm happy to talk kind of my background in science, the process of science journalism, and like finding and talking about good stories. I'm happy to talk about kind of AI and where it can go, where it's headed, which I know is kind of tangential to some of what we were talking about. CRISPR, medicine, anything else. I'd love to open it up if anything else comes up. Otherwise, I can, you know, just start talking again. But if there is anything, please, please, please don't be afraid to like steer the ship or anything like that. I'd love to chat and discuss and see what comes of it.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty curious, like
Yeah.
how the writing process is for you. Like, how do you choose like which, um, I don't know, articles are interesting or relevant,
Mhm.
and like, um, I guess like I'm also kind of curious like what a day in the life looks like. Like,
Yeah.
how do you like get into the writing mood? How many articles do you do a day? Kind of like that stuff, the
Yeah.
writing process.
Right. Yeah. How do I get into the writing mood? I am dragged from my bed, kicking and screaming, and I do it. No, it's cool. I'm going to tackle that one first for no reason. Um, it's really fun because I loved doing science. I really enjoyed the creativity of like study design, for example, right? I want to answer this question. How do I set up an experiment that will give me some sort of hint about it, right? And I can kind of approach writing that same way. You know, in a more involved story, by the time I'm ready to write, I will have had my questions, I will have had interviews with some scientists or experts or engineers, ethicists, whoever I'm talking to, whoever is most relevant to that question. I'll have the interviews with them where they'll have some pretty cool quotes and pretty cool ideas. I'll have my own research. I'll have other articles on the subject. And to me, it's very much fitting together a puzzle. And it's kind of like, okay, my challenge in writing a story is framing it in a way that someone wants to click on it. You know, Clickbait is irritating and annoying, and it sucks, and it's often detrimental. But also, the reality is online media. I want to write a headline that you will click on and that you will want to read. Not by using any trickery, but making sure it's interesting. So slapping a headline on top of a story that actually entices a reader is crucial in a way that I wish it wasn't, but it is. And then from there, it's like, okay, how do I fit these pieces together? How do I craft these, unrelated scientists who I spoke to into one narrative? How do I make sure I'm answering all the questions that I had, but also that I think the reader will have? Because again, if I'm writing something and putting it out to the world, it's not for me, it's for whoever's reading it to walk away more engaged and more informed and hopefully more curious. So it's kind of solving that puzzle that is the most fun to me. I get to kind of be a non-committal grad student also with all these, with covering the wide variety of topics, because I get to learn about CRISPR. I get to talk to CRISPR scientists about what they're doing and learn what's coming next. I get to talk to AI engineers, talk to video game developers sometimes. That's fun as hell. I talked to like the guy who designed part of the controls for Halo because I was writing a story about Fortnite, which is exhausting, but that's where it took me. And it was cool to be able to learn about all those things without needing to like commit to that being my career. So that's part of what keeps me in it, because it's just very fun to learn and share what I learn. A day in the life, Futurism is very much a news operation, kind of in the form it's taking right now. Futurism, the publication, not the, world outlook. I don't really know what to describe it as, philosophy, whatever. So a lot of what we do is quick news hits. We kind of our main news product. It started being called the Digest. Now it's called the Bite, with a Y. Very clever. And so much of that is just there's a shotgun blast of science and tech news happening. We want to tell you about as much of that as possible. So a lot of my day is writing very quick news stories, news blogs, where the original reporting sometimes takes a backseat to just the imperative to get this information out there and saying like, okay, this is the conversation about this news development as it's happening right now. I want to put that in front of you. I want to push it forward a little bit, but I mainly want to get, if 5 important things happen, I want to write 5 very quick articles in a day, just so that all of these things that are happening don't get kind of swept under the rug or ignored or fall to the wayside, because there are so many things grabbing our attention, and all of them are deserving of this conversation. So a lot of my daily work doesn't involve a huge amount of reporting on them in that sense, but it is a lot of like finding, out of everything that's happening in space, which one's really important? Out of everything that's happening in coronavirus news, what's really important? Did a new vaccine research preprint come out? Let's talk about that. Grabbing that, turning it into a really quick thing that a reader can kind of scroll through and walk away from, knowing a little bit more and kind of being able to navigate their world a little bit better as these technological things are happening around them is really important to what we do. And then, when I have a more involved story, a more ambitious, maybe investigative story, it's reading papers whenever I have journal access. Use your journal access, your paywalls for as long as you have them. Graduating college was a nightmare for losing all those. Identifying scientists who are kind of leaders in this space, and maybe scientists who are doing important work in this space, but maybe haven't been thrust into the spotlight, into the forefront. Getting them on the phone and talking to them about their work. And again, kind of prodding them a little bit where they can talk about all the cool stuff they're doing, and I kind of nudge them and push them to talk about what might go wrong or what they still don't know, where the unanswered questions are, and crafting that into my narrative, because the unanswered questions that a scientist has are certainly going to be the unanswered questions that a reader might have, and that's kind of where future research will just by default fall into. So saying, okay, look what this AI algorithm can do. Here's what it can't. So you can just assume people are going to be working on that, and that's where I kind of dive into. And kind of knowing which ones are important. Roll the dice. I wish there was a secret. There's so many important things happening where it's kind of, sometimes we kind of say, all right, well, which one is also the most interesting? Which one might start the best conversation? And just because Futurism, the news outlet, again, is such a small team, I'm a reporter there. We have one other full-time reporter. We have a dedicated news editor, and that's the bulk of the operation on the editorial side. There's a lot we can't do, so we just kind of have to say, what do I think will have the biggest impact? What do I think will resonate with our readers too? Because again, it is, we want it to be an editorial product that the reader will enjoy and like and actually engage with, instead of kind of boring them. So that was a long-winded and unfocused answer that I hoped answered some of those questions. Before I start talking in circles, I'm going to cut it off there. Again, this is why I write instead of speak. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about like what some of those kind of most interesting stories were and how I tackled them, if that would be helpful. Or if anyone else had an unrelated question, I'd love to go there. I don't want to go on forever and ever. Yeah, I'll talk about maybe two of the other stories that I wrote, just to kind of explain that process. So one of them is about medicine. I came across, there's this doctor, and again, names are right out of my head, sorry, but there's this doctor who was, he's made a practice out of live streaming human autopsy. And yeah, eyebrows going up. It was the same for me. And I was like, all right, well, you hear something like that, you got to know what the hell's going on, right? And I reached out to him expecting it to be this kind of exploitative, gruesome practice. Like, who is watching this? Who's tuning into this? Why is this guy doing this, right? This deeply personal procedure that's done for a deceased person and done for their family. Like, why is it on the internet, right? And so I get him on the phone and we have this conversation, and the way that he approaches his work was so compassionate, and so thoughtful about these issues before I even brought them up, that it was such a reversal from my own preconceived notion about what this guy was doing. I thought it was horrifying at first, right? Like, if I if I die and I end up on this guy's counter, like what is this going to happen to me? But like the way that he approaches family members and the way that he turned it into an educational tool for med students or high school students or other biology, anatomy, whatever students who don't have access to the tools in person, right? The way that some bereaving family members saw it as an act of closure or like almost like an act of organ donation to kind of go towards scientific education was just so cool to me that it became what I thought was going to be like, look at this garish thing, turned into this really compassionate and thoughtful profile on this doctor who is now building up like an interactive map of the human body where you can kind of click on an organ and see like a GoPro strapped to his forehead angle of like him removing it and him talking about it and him giving like an educational lecture about it. So I think that's probably the story where that changed the most from me going in and reaching out to an interview to the final product. And yeah, the fact that he had all these ethical guidelines in place and like who he would even approach about like participating in this between and which family members he could tell to not even like pressure them or bring it up. It was very cool. Another one, which I think is one of the more interesting and kind of like twists and turns stories I wrote, is about this music group called Data Bots, maybe, I don't know. It's DADA bots, and they use AI as a tool, neural nets, to kind of like auditory GANs. If you know what those are the types of algorithm that might like recreate a work of art after seeing a bunch of art or something. But they do it for music. And they're synthesizing brand new genres of music using AI that's trained on different genres and fusing them together. They put out, I think it's still ongoing, like a live stream of this like horrific death metal that is, it like sounds like there's lyrics, but it was created entirely by an algorithm that just listened to a lot of black metal. But they used this tool that let them synthesize genres, and they put out this cover because we asked them about it, and we kind of came up with like what would be the weirdest fusion that we can ask you to make. So me and the other people at Futurism said, can you make Frank Sinatra sing Toxic by Britney Spears? And they did it, and it sounded like Frank Sinatra, but maybe like from the bottom of a well or something. Like he was kind of straining, you know, and he was singing Toxic, like it was like a jazzy kind of like what you'd hear in kind of like an old timey club. And it was awesome. Like, and it was brand new art and music, like with AI as the creator, depending on how you look at it. And it was really cool to highlight that. And then I wrote a story on them, like, look what we did, how cool. And then the real story happened months later because they uploaded the song to YouTube and YouTube took it down over a copyright request, or a copyright strike, or whatever the exact term is. And I mean, the amount of questions that raises about, you know, first of all, who was claiming copyright? Was it Frank Sinatra because, or Frank Sinatra's people, right? Because it was a Frank Sinatra cover. Was it Britney Spears because it was Britney Spears's lyrics? But it was neither, and it was an AI creation, and yet somehow it fell in the yeah, like violated copyright law, or so YouTube assumed, because it was so similar. And like, how do we battle that in a legal sense? So the real story became like, okay, how is AI changing the creation process? How is AI changing legal ownership over creative works? And the story ended up being restored. And from that one, it was I talked to the legal team who pro bono represented this music group and got the song restored, because AI and the law is such an not unexplored but unresolved topic. And this was such a great case study that let me springboard into a discussion of all of that in a very fascinating way for me, because it was the questions that I had were all unanswered in the field. And I got to kind of sit down and say, okay, you two as lawyers, there's no precedent for this case, right? There's no legal decision that exists that you can draw on to say, no, actually, this weird new genre fusion that's cool enough on its own that an AI algorithm churned out is legally permissible and it's its own work and it doesn't violate any copyright laws. Like, how do you even begin to argue that? And to sit down with them and kind of get their, not only how they tackled it, but their tips for people using AI for art, and to kind of be able to share that was so fascinating for me. Because again, there are still not many answers, but to be able to identify that conversation and really focus on that and push that discussion forward was really rewarding for me. In the sense, for me, I'm going to go on forever about that. I'm so sorry. But it was just so cool to be able to highlight this issue that, like, a copyright claim on YouTube. If I frame it as that, it's not very interesting, but it's this whole new branch of law and AI that needs to be answered was very fascinating and cool. And that kind of turned into, in my opinion, a killer story, because where else are you going to hear about this specific issue? Where else are you going to be able to talk about this and learn about this? Because when else would it ever come up, right? And to get an audience thinking about those issues was very cool for me as a writer and someone who got to push that conversation forward. I lost track of where I started that story, and it just kind of ended somewhere. So if anyone has any other questions, I'd love to switch gears. I can kind of talk about more stories. I realize we're arriving at the end of time, and I don't want to take up your whole afternoon because I'm on a roll and I'll talk for days. So someone cut me off, with other questions or whatever. Yeah, I'm like going through the other stories I could talk about, but I don't want to do like an hour a piece. So if there's anything else anyone wants to know about, whether it's journalism, science, tech, anything, please.
Yeah, this is more of an opinion-based question.
Yeah.
But so how do you think that works of media, and I'm just thinking specifically anime because I watch a lot of that, how does that affect our perception of the future? Because I know there's a lot of works that play on that. You have Ghost in the Shell, Akira, things sort of like Sword Art Online, which are more fantasy, but kind of take technology into the mix. All those shows and how those portray the goods and the bads of future innovation, how that affects the population's view of what the future could look like.
Yeah. Not to dismiss the question in any way, because that's a great question and I wish I had more answers. Like, me personally, my anime education is very entry level, so I can't really weigh in on the specifics you named, but I will say that the role of science fiction, right, and the media that we consume is vastly influential, just in the sense that I think one of the most like prominent real world robots out there is Sophia. If you know Sophia by Hanson Robotics and Singularity Net, which is the robot I'm sure you've seen, very humanoid, has conversations, goes on a lot of late night talk shows and everything. And people see that and they're like, oh, wow, this is like just like C3PO, right? Or something, to use the most pedestrian example possible. I'm really telling on myself. They say, oh, wow, look what we did. This is it. It's here. And then you kind of lift the thinnest of like curtains and you say, oh, well, a lot of those answers are scripted in advance, right? I think, the role of the media we consume is kind of another double-edged sword, in the sense that, yes, it's deeply inspiring to say, oh, look, imagine if we had this world, if we could build these things, like, let's work towards it, right? But also, I think a lot of times that line gets blurred, where if I build AI and I'm an AI startup and I say, look, my algorithm can do this, are the people who I'm trying to sell it to going to assume that it's vastly more powerful than it is, and that I'm more accomplished than I am, that my company can deliver more than I can rightfully claim, because the notion of AI is based on these things? It's a tough question to sort out. I'm not sure I'm answering your original question, and for that I apologize. But I think, am I on track? Like, is there? Yeah. Okay. Cool. I guess that's kind of how I approach it, and I wish I could lean into the specifics you gave. But is there kind of a more specific issue that you're more curious about within that? Because I realize I'm being very vague.
Just one of the things that I was sort of noting, because I'm watching this show, it's called Serial Experiments Lane, which deals with a lot of heavy topics in that. But one of the main ones is technology, and how the main character essentially begins to really get into technology, but in a bad way, to where she's trying to. It's a 90s show, so a lot of the technology is kind of dated per se, but like the concept is there, where she's essentially trying to almost transfer her soul onto the internet or the open net, where she's there and she's permanent, where she has essentially no boundaries from her body. But then it like questions come around to, is that good, is that like safe, or like, you know, the greater questions. And
Right.
that's one of the things that I was thinking, that a lot of media also sort of gives us these like predicaments of, if this were to happen, or could this happen in the future, where people become more wary of the field as a whole,
Mhm.
instead of also looking at the good. So they become more wary of it, and
Okay.
they're more scared of the field as a whole. Yeah.
Okay. No, I follow now. I appreciate you clarifying. Yeah. So to be a lot less vague, I think that gets back to that whole issue of just because we can, should we, right? And it's tough because you don't, I mean, if we could upload our consciousness, there are so many startups that want to, and prominent companies too, that want to build living memorials, right? Or like, oh, based on someone's digital footprint, the posts and everything they've put online, can we recreate their personality? And brain computer interfaces, can we someday upload ourselves? I mean, it's tough because, yeah, I think a lot of people will hear about these things and say, oh, absolutely, absolutely not, I don't want anything to do with that. But it's such a difficult question of like, do we then just say, nah, let's not even pursue it? Or do we say, okay, well, assuming someone's going to be working on this, rather, do we have the conversations? Um, do we have the ethical conversations? Do we have the discussions about, before this thing exists, what guidelines do we want to be in place? What restrictions do we want to be in place? What rules do we want to put in place to make sure that it's used responsibly, right? Because I think there are a lot of technologies out there that we built and again, a very general we, that were built and then were the subject of, oh no, look what's happening. What do we do about this? And I think helping to kind of envision those futures and have productive conversations with ethicists and raise these issues is kind of I don't want to say a healthier way to look at it, but that's kind of how I describe it, in that sense of like, don't shy away from the difficult conversations, but have them, raise the issues, and talk to the people who can really weigh in and help steer the future in a better way, so that, again, not that anything is inevitable, but should this technology exist, again, that it lends itself to a world that we want to be in. I think it's cliched within journalism by now, but one of the best examples of this is Black Mirror, right? If you've seen that, where every episode is kind of a vignette of technology gone dystopian, right? Some of them are uplifting, but a lot of them are a little bleak, or they're very much skirting that gray area where it's like, okay, this looks cool. Look how horribly wrong things are going. And for example, there was one about robo-dogs where the robot dogs kind of it turned on humans and it turned into a massacre. There was one where social media and kind of like your rating out of 5 stars um, influenced the cars you could buy, the buildings you could walk into, the jobs you could have, and like your social standing was entirely based on social media. And like these are science fiction, right? But they very much touch on the issues that we're facing and that we're going to be facing in 5, 10, 15 years. But the most interesting thing about that, and the reason I say it was a cliche in journalism, is because every time a technology that resembled a Black Mirror episode surfaced, everyone was like, oh no, this is just like Black Mirror, this is a nightmare, without realizing that the creators of the show did their homework and based these episodes on things that already exist. So it's kind of, or are coming soon, right? Like the robot dogs have been around for years. There's all those viral videos of them dancing or whatever. And I mean, our digital selves are pervasive in all aspects of society, especially a year when we've all been home alone, right? And I think it's easy to say, oh no, this is just like that scary TV show, and say, I don't want anything to do with that, right? In some cases, that might be for the best, but I think part of my job and part of the job of anyone who wants to talk about the future and steer things in a positive direction is to say, okay, yeah, that looks terrible. How do we still push science and technology forward while benefiting the people around us, right? And again, I'm veering way off from your original question, so I apologize. But I think to your point of, how do you grapple with those issues? It's just have the conversations, talk to the people working on it, read voraciously, about these issues, so that instead of just making a huge statement of like, okay, I don't want anything to do with that. Say, okay, how can we build this? Put controls in place, put guardrails in place, so that it leads to a brighter world rather than something that's scary and just kind of leads to all of us being in this downtrodden sci-fi dystopia, right? I'm getting way off track again, so I hope that was more in line with what you were asking. But the unsatisfying answer is, yeah, it's tough, and that's a huge issue that we grapple with. How do we not get discouraged? How do we stay productive with these conversations that we keep wanting to have? I hope that was somewhat relevant. Awesome. Cool. I realize I'm holding all of you late again because I can talk about this forever. So if this is a great place to kind of say, cool, let's chat again someday. If you have other questions, I'm happy to hang out and answer them. But if it is leaning towards a former, I just want to say, I mean, this is so cool to me that this group exists, right? A group of people who want to enter this world and want to shape it in a positive direction. It's fascinating to me, so I hope it stays and grows. I commend what you're all building, and yeah, it was an honor and deeply flattering to be a part of it. So I can't thank you enough for the invite.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming in.
Yeah.
Really great ideas that you exposed us to.
I had some very serious, like, did the homework on the way to class vibes, so I'm so relieved.
No, yeah, it was great. I also I really appreciated getting it from like a different perspective because you
Yeah,
have the, writing, journalism, that kind of perspective. And I think looking at the future in different perspectives is also useful,
yeah,
because often, we get it from the more like kind of like science,
right.
that kind of view.
Hmm.
Um, so I think this was really, really interesting. So
Yeah,
thank
well,
you again.
I'm relieved. Yeah, no, of course.
All right, if this is a good place to stop, I think this has been awesome. If you
Yeah,
guys have any other questions or anything, I mean, we can always, like you said, potentially meet in the future. Who knows?
yeah, and I mean, you know how to reach me. I'm happy to be a resource if there's some way to do that, right? I don't know what shape or form that would take, but I'm not hard to reach. So always happy to chat more about whatever, whether or not it's in a formal meeting and talk or anything like that. So just throwing that out there, do with it what you will. On that
On that
note.
note, well, thank you
Cool, yeah.
again. Good
Yeah.
luck with all your work, and
Thanks.
we'll keep following you. You're doing great.
All
And
right.
yeah,
Cool.
thank you for
All right.
coming
Thanks,
in.
guys. Cheers.
All right, see ya.
So long.